My guest today is Ann Dunkin, the Chief Information Officer for the Energy Department. Ann, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you. And, obviously we're here to talk about cloud. So level set for us. Where is energy at today in terms of using cloud services to meet the kind of mission needs of the department?
Sure. So energy takes sort of an all of the above strategy to cloud platforms. So while there are many, many cloud platforms out there, and given the size of energy, we probably have way more than the big ones, we've made a point of making sure that people have access to AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. So we built enterprise instances of those, which are available to our labs, plants, and sites, as well as headquarters. And obviously, as I said, there are other things out there. There are other instances of those, and there are other platforms people are using. In addition, we strongly believe in adopting cloud services where they make sense. Where we can get essentially a commodity product from the cloud, like email, for example, we're going to go do that as opposed to either hosting it on premise or building our own. So that's really where we are with the cloud right now.
Got it. And I know in 2019, I think it was, DOE issued the Cloud Smart Reference Guide. You kind of just laid out the overarching goals for DOE when it comes to the cloud, but is there a formal cloud strategy that you're working off of today, that you're working on for the future? What can people look to?
Yeah, so there are many cloud strategies at DOE.
Yeah.
So we operate with both the sort of the DOE-wide strategy, but each portion of the enterprise is expected to develop their own cloud strategy to not only look at how they're going to implement cloud, but also how they're going to secure cloud. So a lot of our work right now around the cloud is more about security and making sure that people are using the cloud in a secure manner, and about scalability so that we can lower our costs by providing higher scale instances, and even when our instances aren't at scale, by working with vendors to say, DOE is one organization. Our vendors are very good at selling to each of us individually, and our point now is, we're one organization and we want to work with you together to create enterprise agreements that reduce the cost of the cloud across DOE.
Got it. Yeah, we definitely want to talk about security later on, but just on that point about, DOE is one enterprise, but of course you have the different national labs. I'm sure it's somewhat federated to a certain extent, but you're trying to create kind of sort of an enterprise approach when it comes to the cloud. How do you do that? How do you work with the different labs and components on their plans to make sure they line up where appropriate across at the headquarters level?
Right. Yeah. So we're not just kind of federated, we're very federated, because keep in mind that 16 of our 17 labs are private sector. Many of our cleanup sites are also managed by private sector entities, and even some of the DOE and entities that are public sector still have huge private components to them. So there's a lot of different missions and individuality. So our goal is to do two things. One is we create enterprise instances of these capabilities. Not only the cloud platforms, but also cloud services. For example, we run ServiceNow as a low-code, no-code platform that people can use across DOE for their needs, but also we create enterprise agreements so that if it doesn't make sense for someone to be in our instance, for example, in many cases, from a standpoint of managing data, it may be that the labs can't work directly in one of our instances, but they can leverage an enterprise agreement we've put in place to support costs across all of DOE. So the alignment is really on a couple levels. One is how can we share to reduce cost, but the other is how do we ensure that the way people set up their instances follows all the policies and guidance that we provide, and whether that's DOE guidance or federal guidance. And part of our job is to make sure those guardrails are in place for everybody. So my office makes sure that people understand those policies and that they're part of developing the DOE part of that, what we call the directive process. So we engage them in that directive process, and we work together to proliferate those directives, and then people are able to follow them and get them to use them in a way that meet their needs while still following all the rules.
Yeah, and I'm sure when you find that you can save money as one of those smaller enterprises by working with the larger enterprise, that's pretty good incentive to work in that manner.
Absolutely. I mean, the most of the enterprise agreements we generate are generated because we're being asked by parts of the enterprise to generate them. So we're very careful. We can only do so many enterprise agreements, so we try and make sure the enterprise agreements we create are the ones that people are looking for and not the ones we just think are a good idea. So those parts of the organization are generally eager to use those when we put them in place.
So DOE obviously has some very important national security missions, just national missions in general, ranging from quantum computing to nuclear and the like. And you said you're using cloud services where they make sense, where appropriate. So how are cloud services perhaps enabling DOE's kind of really important bleeding edge national security missions today?
So I think there's a couple things to keep in mind, right? One is that they enable us to have flexibility to scale work, whether that is to use a hybrid cloud model where we're bursting into the cloud for capacity, or whether in fact someone says, really this work is best done by putting all of it in the cloud. If you look at, we do high performance computing, and there are sites where their high performance computing is on premise entirely. There are sites where it's the cloud entirely, and then there are sites where high performance computing is in fact done as a hybrid with a high performance computer on premise on the campus, and then bursting out in the cloud for some bigger jobs. So that's an example of how we're able to use that to create scale. Another example is for things that are not needed very frequently. EIA is in the process of looking at how they can move towards more cloud services because they're a situation where their data is, it's our statistical agency, EIA, and their data is used occasionally in big bursts. So when new data is put out there, then lots of people want to look at that, and then there's not a lot of use after that. So it's a great example of where we can create burst capacity in the cloud. But also, it allows us to, from a less exciting place, in support of that mission, we're able to replace technology. We're able to replace older technology that might sit in our data center with more modern technology that's in the cloud without us making that one-time capital investment. And again, we're able to scale that as needed. But that allows us to not only have access to newer technology, but access to more secure technology as well. And then the same thing is, when you look at enterprise apps that are essentially commodity applications, if we're doing those in the cloud, we're using fewer resources to do those, and we're able to focus on the mission more completely and know that those, there are plenty of things that we could do more securely than the private sector, or at least the non-DOE private sector. But I would argue that those things like email, for example, aren't. There are people who do email all day, every day. That's their job. For us to come in and say, well, we're going to run email on premise as an example, makes absolutely no sense because that's not our core competency. We want to be focused on our core competencies and let other people run and secure things that aren't our core competency.
Got it. That's a great lead into my next question. I know DOE was able to consolidate email services under an enterprise cloud email project using the TMF Technology Modernization Fund. I think one of the very first TMF projects back in 2019. How are you kind of building off of that in terms of the collaboration and productivity space? So
DOE didn't so much consolidate email under that, was that we moved it primarily from on-premise to in the cloud. So we still have a number of instances of Microsoft Office 365 across DOE, and there's a right number, and we probably don't have the right number right now. I keep in mind that we're never going to consolidate any government email with private sector email. So, for example, DOE headquarters is not going to share email with Sandia National Lab, as an example, because private sector email needs to live in that company's private sector organization. However, we can probably consolidate a little bit more within DOE now that everybody's in the cloud, as well as, more importantly, we're building out trust relationships with all those organizations so that we can easily collaborate, use the tools that are available to us to seamlessly work together as an organization. And so that'll be some combination of DOE federal employees going into consolidated instances and DOE federal employees and contractors working together across a shared platform, but with different instances.
Is there a path forward for kind of initiating that work or bringing it together?
So we are well into the process of both doing some consolidation. We have some organizations that have stood up and said we want to do some consolidation, and so we're working with those parts of DOE, but also building the trust relationships are well underway with our organization. Depending upon which metric you look at, there's some places where that's 97% complete across the enterprise for some very basic functionality, and as we get to the more advanced functionality, we are further down the road. But that is in process right now, and we've built some capabilities such as our new, relatively new now, intranet Energy Hub, and we want to make sure everybody has the ability to fully access Energy Hub and make full use of it, as well as, for example, Environmental Management has put their site on Energy Hub, so they want to make sure their folks have full access to it. So there's a lot of urgency on our part to get everybody in there and sharing so that they can fully utilize the tools we're making available to our employees.
Interesting. And that's in the cloud, that intranet, it kind of...
that is built on SharePoint, so it's part of Office 3. It's part of that Office 365 ecosystem.
Got it. All right. And there's another interesting development. I think in January, Energy put out a request for information saying that it was looking to move its HR IT systems to the cloud. How are you kind of moving forward with that project?
Well, so that project is actually led out of HC with our engagement. So I was actually just on a meeting this morning with the Deputy Secretary talking about this project. We are in the early stages of identifying, like I said, HC is driving, so I probably should say HC is in the early stages of identifying their proposed way to proceed on this project. But it's an incredibly important project. The deputy and HC and I are completely aligned on this, and we've agreed they're the best place to do the work because he has experience doing this previously. So we want them to drive forward implementing this with our support, and then we will assess, once we implement our new HR system, whether that's something that we then want to move to operate out of IT, or whether we're going to continue to operate that out of HC. But HC are the right subject matter experts to do this work for us. And right now, they're looking at the options as to how to proceed, and frankly, how to fund the project. So we don't have a pile of money sitting in the corner waiting to come out and fund that project.
Got it. Okay, that's something to watch. I mean, when you start talking about human capital management systems, financial systems management systems, those are a little bit more, I guess, complex, of course, than email productivity and modernizing those. Sometimes you see agencies run into hiccups, and what are some important considerations from the IT perspective on some of those more complex projects?
Well, this is the great example of demonstrating how to modernize the system or how not to, depending upon how you do it. So we're talking about an old on-premise solution that has lots and lots of connections to a lot of things, and our goal is to number one, buy a cloud service that we can use going into the future and simplify how that operates across DOE to be able to ensure that, as one of my colleagues has always said, that we are not building the next legacy system, that we are in fact building a system that will allow us, in fact, buying a system that will allow us to be nimble and to integrate new capabilities. And what you really want to be doing is looking at that system, configuring it, and the biggest sort of effort of development should be, oh, they don't have this capability, I've got to go get this over here, so I'm going to integrate those with an API. And then when they create that capability, I can shut that API down and pull it in, or maybe this is really the best solution, and I'll continue to use that. But it's a very lightweight activity to go ahead and connect those APIs. You're not building extensive integrations. You're not tying those systems together in ways that makes it hard for them to upgrade in the future. So really, that's the key consideration. We select a product that's going to meet our employees' needs, that's going to be available off the shelf, that we can configure and not get engaged in any sort of customization or building modules or things like that, and that we can then integrate that with other best-of-breed capabilities we need to build out the whole system. And we have, we've already created new capabilities with our low-code, no-code platforms, hiring portal that supports the 21st century workforce experience as we bring on the Clean Energy Corps folks. So we very quickly stood that up. So because we're bringing 2,000 people on over a very short period of time at DOE. And so things like that, then you go, okay, now that we've got this, we connect that to the new system and we go forward. So we're building things out there already, but we really need that overall HR system to glue it all together.
I wanted to ask about that low code, no code system you mentioned. Is that portal sounds like one thing that's been built using that so far. How else is DOE using low code, no code?
Well, so there's all sorts of things all over DOE, but in my office, we've been tuning that experience up. We started, probably the first big thing they did on there was, if you remember, a year and a half ago now, we were doing vaccine attestation applications, and so that was their first effort, and it was interesting to see the bumps in the road as they we tried to use that tool and to go up to speed, and watching them go from that, which was kind of slow and bumpy, relatively speaking, to now where the Clean Energy Core Hiring Portal, environmental justice dashboards, they've done some AI work in that platform, some work to give us some tools to support our efforts to respond to the Ukrainian war last year that we're still responding to, but those were built out last year. So a number of small applications that can fill those gaps between the systems that we already own to allow people to be more effective in doing their job.
Got it. Interesting. Are there any other shared services that are particularly important to mention when it comes to DOE's approach to the cloud?
So I think the most important shared service for us at DOE right now really is our Office 365 platform. That is the biggest one that we use. But as I talked about, we have all three cloud platforms available, as well as a couple different low-code, no-code platforms available to us. But DOE is a very diverse environment, and so there are not a lot of tools that are shared broadly across DOE that are also in the cloud. And so that's our goal, is the other handful of things that are broadly shared across DOE to move those into the cloud.
Are there any particular ones that you could mention today?
Well, we just talked about the most important one, right, which is our HR system.
Right.
That's really the next really big system, or maybe the only other really big system, because you start to look at all the pieces, and when you start looking at all the pieces there, those are, time and attendance comes in there, training comes in there, and you start to look and go, oh, these are actually all the things that we share across DOE, when we get right down to it, outside of some things like, security vetting and things like that, which are not, security vetting is probably not going to be changed much in the near future.
So you mentioned that security is one of the big facets of your work around the cloud at DOE, one of your big focuses. What's the department's plan going forward for kind of monitoring the growth of cloud services kind of across its components? And there was the March 2023 IG report that kind of flagged, making sure that those services are appropriately authorized, because I think there were a couple locations where there was some pieces of that missing.
Yeah, so DOE's federated nature is a challenge when we look at making sure that we understand. I talk a lot about DOE knowing what DOE knows when we talk about sharing information, but there's also, how does DOE know what DOE has? And it's incumbent upon every reporting entity within DOE, which are the labs, plants, sites, and headquarters elements, to accurately report their application inventory, and to actively get those authorized. Right? We can once we know something exists, we can ensure it's authorized because we can track it. But if we don't know something exists, we can't do that. So one of our main efforts is really spending time with all those department elements to ensure they understand what needs to happen. So one of my commitments has been that amongst my team, that every significant organization within DOE will see someone in my organization in this fiscal year, or this calendar year, that shows up, talks to them, sits down with them. It can't always be me, it can't always be my deputy or the CISO, but we have, across our organization, we're trying to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to sit down face-to-face with our team, talk about what those expectations are, make sure people really understand what their obligations are to secure our environment and to report information, because it's never the case that people don't want to tell us what they're doing. It's often the case that they don't understand their obligations, because you realize when you start to go down the levels at a headquarters, right? You might go out to a site and there's a field office, and then at that field office there's a contractor and there's a subcontractor and a subcontractor and a subcontractor, and down at maybe that third subcontractor is where that system exists. And so making sure that they understand which of their systems should be reported to the federal government, and then making sure those get reported. Those are the challenges we run into to ensure that that all the systems that actually are covered get reported, and once they're reported, then they can be tracked and managed.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're starting to see here, or you've been hearing some vendors talk about this as like attack surface management, but really it's just kind of understanding what systems you have on network and where your data resides, right? And that's not always the easiest task.
No.
It's easy to say it, but
Yes.
less easy to do it.
Well, and it's easy for me to say, you report every system to us. Right. Every system has to be authorized, and every system has to be reported and in our inventory. But it's much harder to make sure that message goes down to every single person. And the rules for purchasing when you're in the federal government are very specific. But when you get to a contractor, it's a lot easier for someone to pull a credit card out and buy something, and then discover, 6 months later that actually that system had federal data in it. It should have been included in inventory, and the rules for whether something should or shouldn't be included in inventory are not always obvious, and not everybody always agrees on them. It's not always true that the IG and the site agree about what should have happened either. So, right. But it's never a matter of someone didn't want to report something or someone intentionally went out and got something they shouldn't have. It's simply understanding the rules and then making sure that they follow them. And of course, making sure we all have the same interpretation of the rules as well.
Sure, got it. Cloud security authorization processes, how to make sure those are as fulsome as possible. How else do you think that those processes should continue to evolve and improve going forward as cloud services continue to be adopted?
So I think the most important thing that we can do with cloud security authorization, FedRAMP, whatever it may be, is within the government and within departments and agencies do more sharing. So more inherited controls, more shared authorizations where we say, okay, my environment and your environment are really similar. Either I'm just going to accept that ATO because it's so similar, or I'm going to inherit 95% of your controls and I'm only going to test a handful of controls as opposed to the whole group. We spend way too much time starting from scratch. There was a story actually with the Office 365 environment that within the same department, the department had an authorization, and another part of the department went through and completed their very own authorization from start to finish that took 18 months and insisted upon having it be even more stringent. And the CISO in that particular group said, we can't have any exceptions. And of course, ATOs allow for mitigations and various things, so you don't have to hit 100% of every control. Because not every system can hit 100% of all the controls. That's why compensating controls are allowed. That's why mitigations are allowed, and other things that simply make it so that you can get a system up and running. And this particular individual was just stuck on everything had to be 100% perfect before it could go live, even though it was live in the rest of that organization. And it was a mess. And that's an extreme example, but the fact of the matter is we spend a lot of money retesting and reauthorizing things that other people have tested and authorized in very similar environments. And so the best thing we can do is to make it crystal clear to people that they have the ability to accept the work of others, and then get people to be willing to accept the work of others, so that we can save a lot of time and money going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the FedRAMP Authorization Act that just passed last year included that presumption of adequacy clause in there, so that FedRAMP authorized tools can be used by another federal agency without further checks. Is that CISO and that one particular organization, is that sort of the crux of the problem there? Someone just kind of saying, no, we have to have our own way of doing these things, or are there other challenges that you have to overcome?
Well, I think there is a lot of I have to prove it myself that goes on. I don't trust, I'm not going to try. I'm Department A. I don't trust Department B. I know those people over there, they don't know what they're doing. Or I don't know them over there and I don't know if they know what they're doing. So I'm going to go and do the same exact thing they already did. And it's even more frustrating when that starts being, two parts of the same organization doing that and saying, well, I don't trust your ATO, I'm going to go do my own. So putting that in the legislation at least, gives the folks who want to share the ability to point to something and say, look, we're supposed to be able to do this. But it doesn't create the culture change for those folks who don't believe that anybody else can do as good a job of assessing something as they can. Now, the irony of it is very few of us assess things ourselves. We use third-party assessors. And in most cases, that third party is probably the same one who assessed that other system, whether it's the same company or even the same people at the same company that you're then paying again to do the same work they already did. And if they already did it, they're probably not doing it again. You're just paying them again for it. So there's a lot of money being wasted and a lot of time, more importantly, being wasted by people who just choose not to accept the work of others. And that's what we really, truly need to do, is get people to accept others' work. Adding to the legislation, I think, is hugely helpful. But we already had some mechanisms that allowed people to do that. So, right. And there are a number of places I can think of where we've passed additional legislation to reinforce things that we really already had the ability to do if people were just willing to do them.
Right. Sometimes that's what it takes, though, of course. And this seems particularly important as we start to talk about the implementation of software supply chain security and sort of software attestation forms that are coming. I think there is some intention for a FedRAMP package to be able to be used if you have that as a vendor as a software attestation, but having those sort of reciprocal processes are going to be really important as more and more of these processes come out.
Yes, I think that's another place where, right now, we're going to have lots of departments and agencies collecting the same software attestation forms from the same vendors. And obviously, many of those vendors are going to handle that by just putting a form on their website or emailing it to everybody. But that also means that every department and agency is maintaining a database. So, the future, I think, there is really that there should be a central repository, probably linked to FedRAMP in some way, where people can look for their software attestation. And only if it's not there would you then need to go collect that from the vendor. So I think that, and I actually don't think I know, because we've had this conversation, that my colleagues, the other CIOs, would like to see the same thing. We really would prefer not to have every one of us collecting that individually, because it is going to be hugely important going forward. And the amount of software out there is just mind-boggling. It's going to be a huge effort for people just to understand what they need to collect, much less to collect it all.
Sure, and I'm sure a cost to build out those repositories on your own and things like that. All right, well, I know Energy, we had the national cyber strategy come out earlier this year. I know Energy is working on its own new cyber strategy. What can you tell us about that? And since this is the cloud exchange, how will cloud feature?
So obviously, cloud is going to be a huge part of our cyber strategy. It is modeled after the national cyber strategy, which the folks who are working on my cybersecurity strategy at DOE right now actually worked on the national cybersecurity strategy. They wrote some of the foundational papers that built into that strategy, so they're very well attuned to what that strategy is going to do, and obviously influenced it a great deal because they wrote some of those foundational papers. Cloud is going to be a huge part of that because cloud is clearly where we're going as a government. There will always be things on premise, but there will be a tremendous amount of our workload in the cloud. So our cybersecurity really needs to be able to protect government-owned cloud at DOE, contractor-owned cloud, as well as the private sector cloud. All of those things need to be able to be handled and managed appropriately. In addition, our strategy is being managed as a very inclusive process. So we've got participants from, well, first of all, we had cloud plans from every department element, plant and site. So I think we had 97 cloud plans across DOE. All of those folks are engaged in our cybersecurity strategy as well as that cloud strategy they already engaged in. And so they're going to help us develop a strategy that works for all of DOE and that each part of the organization can then hang their own strategy off of, because we know that it's going to cascade. Just like everything we do in DOE, it's going to cascade. Some parts of the organization, for example, the large parts like science and NSA and environmental management, are probably going to write their own strategy to hang off of that. Others, very small parts of the organization, may simply add some color to our strategy and say this is what we're doing. But in any case, it's really going to be a collaborative effort across DOE, and it's already engaged. There's already a draft in process of that collaborative effort.
More broadly, I mean, these strategies, they come out, and then 4 years on, there's a new one. Mm-hmm. But what value do you see as a CIO and getting these things out there, bringing together organizational consensus, especially on a topic like cyber, and getting your message out there for folks?
Well, so I think number one is the department elements actually count on us to tell them what direction we're trying to take the overall organization. They want to align with headquarters and with the secretary and the deputy secretary's vision. And the only way they get that is if we, as Office of CIO, work with them to develop that vision and put it out there and make sure everybody knows what path we're trying to take. So that's number one. Number two, we're trying to make both the IT strategy and the cybersecurity living documents that we actually look at every year. And we say, okay, so this is our strategy. What are our actual action plans for 23, 24, 25, 26? What are we actually going to do to bring those strategies forward? It's not just, another binder to put on your shelf. It's pretty sad now if you're going to create shelfware, because there's probably not going to be a binder on the shelf. You're just going to save that file on your computer. So you really wasted your time if all you have is a file on your computer that no one looks back at. So our goal really is to make sure that drives implementation planning, and that it gets refreshed as needed to continue to drive implementation planning.
Got it. We talked a little bit about cloud security authorizations, your forthcoming cyber strategy. Anything else in the security space that you're particularly following right now that you think is important to highlight, that you want to highlight for folks?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First, we actually remarkably have not used the word zero trust yet.
Right.
So I think there's a bingo card that says we have to use zero trust.
Yeah.
So zero trust is an important piece of that cybersecurity strategy and our cloud strategy. Zero trust conceptually, we've been doing things that look like zero trust for a while. We've given it a name now. But that part of our strategy for the cloud and for cybersecurity is to protect those high value assets. And to ensure that we look at every asset individually across the network and not just assume that the network is secure. And similarly, we're ensuring that we deliver encryption of our data where we can. Now, keep in mind that we have a lot of operational technologies, a lot of IoT technologies, and those are different animals and have different requirements. And so we are trying to look at our security posture across at least two vectors, right? One vector is what kind of technology is it, because the solutions and the compensating controls are different, whether it's IT, IoT, or OT. And the other is what's our security posture across that. So we have everything from nuclear security sites to Berkeley that does open science to the power grid. So each of those have different requirements to be secured as well because of the need for security and resiliency, because we've got a very high uptime for the power grid. We've got a very high security, even in some cases where things aren't operational in NNSA, and then in some of the science labs, we have to enable scientific collaboration while still keeping data secure. So those are all the considerations we have to look at as we figure out how to take that strategy forward and make sure that we meet the needs of DOE. Because I found myself more and more pointing out recently that security is not actually what our job is. There are people in my organization whose job is security, but our job is to enable DOE's mission by providing technology and tools, or actually to deliver DOE's mission, depending upon where you sit. It's not to make sure it's secure. You have to make sure it's secure to deliver the mission. But if all we do is look at security, we're not doing our job.
Sure, got it. I was wondering, in terms of looking toward the future and enabling DOE to do its job, what steps are you taking to support some of these emerging technologies that everyone is talking about, that are every day in the news? ChatGPT is the buzzword, but there's our AI, machine learning. How are those maybe already supporting some of your national security missions, and what's the future look like?
Yeah, so generative AI certainly has taken all the air out of the room recently, right? So I think that again, this is where you look at two things, right? We have, how does generative AI either help us or hinder us in achieving our mission as a tool, but also how do we do research in AI? So we can't ever set one set of rules around AI tools, recognizing that this is a research area for us as well as an operational area. So we are right now bringing a group across DOE together. They actually had, the Tiger team had their first meeting last week to talk about how we're going to manage generative AI specifically across DOE, how we're going to make sure that it's available for people of a research mission, and how we're going to make sure that the folks who are using it as a productivity tool or simply as something to test out are able to do that securely. And part of the answer is all the rules are already in place. So we have rules to protect privacy. We have rules to protect data. We have all these things in place, but we need to make sure people understand what the guidance is to use those, to apply those rules to this new technology. So we're not going to be putting out new directives, as I said, we call our policies at DOE. But what we will be doing is giving people guidebooks and say, this is how to use these tools safely and successfully so that you protect DOE's assets in the process of using these tools.
What are some of those, best practices at at a high level that people should be following?
Well, I think the most important thing is understanding what the model is that you're using. So if I'm going to put data into a generative AI model, is this AI model sitting in DOE's cloud? Is this actually our own private model? Or are you putting data into a model that is public domain? And if you're putting data into a public domain model, you can't be putting proprietary or nuclear data or things like that, because the models learn from your data, and whether directly or indirectly are potentially sharing back DOE's proprietary data. There's also some question as to, if you put it into somebody's model, who owns it, right? Have you just given ownership for that information? So even if it's really not proprietary, even if you're out at Berkeley and you've got public research data, have you just given away the rights to your research data by putting that into a model? So you really need to understand what the model you're working with is, and that's the most important thing that people need to understand is where, if they put data into a model, where is it going? And is that an appropriate place for the data set? And what happens to the rights to that data?
Generative AI just seems like, from especially perhaps your perspective, classic example of both a threat and an opportunity, this all in one. This Tiger team that you mentioned, just really quickly, is that kind of a formal thing that's going to continue to look at this problem? How are they going to help to lead this issue for DOE?
Well, it's a formal team. My expectation is we've put this group together. They will work together. They will put some guidance together, or a user guide, actually, is what we're going to call it. And then when they're done with the user guide, they'll wrap up. If there's something else that needs to be done, then maybe we'll keep it in place. But I think by definition, a Tiger team at least is designed to be stood up quickly, to do something, and then to go away. And so that certainly is our goal, because people have lots to do, and they don't need, hopefully we can just put that user guide together and let people go on and do their next thing.
Right. All right. And so in the time we have left, I'd love to talk a little bit just about workforce within the context of these conversations we're having about cloud and emerging technologies and cybersecurity. How are you managing, your workforce and the skills you need?
Well, that is always a challenge. Now more than ever, we've got a workforce that is full of skills that are in high demand. So at DOE, we have not only the IT, OT, security workforce, but we also have the research workforce, all of whom are incredibly high demand. Most of our research employees, but not all, are in the private sector. But we still aren't paying typical private sector wages at our labs, right? It's still less than you would if you went out to say if you left Berkeley and went across the Bay to Google, for example, there's going to be a significant pay disparity between those two places. So it's very important that we continue to attract the best talent, and we do that in a couple ways. So early career, college students, we have a number of internships across DOE that bring college students in. My office collaborates with NNSA and the Office of Science on one of those programs, and that program is designed to bring in students with an interest in IT or cybersecurity, even if their major's not in IT or cybersecurity, and get them through a rotation. So they would do 3 years, generally headquarters, a lab, and a plant or other cleanup site or something like that, to give them the breadth of what we do at DOE. At the end of their 3 years, the goal would be to get them a security clearance and have them ready to work, hopefully for DOE, but if not, for the federal government. So the goal being to get them excited about working in the government so that they will then come work for the government. And then we are working in terms of mid-career and more senior folks. We are implemented cybersecurity retention program to give people extra money in those cyber roles. There's also a special pay program that we've signed up to. We were one of the 5 departments that worked on the design of that program, and we've signed up to be part of that when it rolls out, to allow us to pay more competitive at lower grades, because based on market studies, there's a huge disparity in pay at lower grades, less so at higher grades. There's still a challenge with the most senior folks, because there is no place to go beyond either 15 or SES from a pay standpoint. So if you look at the pay cap, we really struggle beyond that point to keep in sort of the most senior folks in the organization when there are other opportunities out there.
Right. Yeah. It's a pretty Byzantine system in government, I'm sure, compared to the private sector. But yeah, the special salary rate, I mean, that's been an interesting development over the past 6 months. Is that something that you're already able to offer, or you have to kind of put more plans in place to do so?
It's not available yet. OPM has not finished the process. So we have all our plans in place. We're ready to go when OPM is ready to let us go forward. So I think we're all set. We're just waiting for the green light on that. And I agree, it's been a pretty quick development. We were very pleased with how quickly OPM brought it forward, and we hope that continues to move forward at a good pace.
Got it. All right. Well, it's interesting how things can change so quickly. I think last year we wouldn't have been talking about generative AI at all. No. And now, of course, that took up a big part of our conversation. But if you could if you could look into your crystal ball, or just tell us what is coming down the pipeline here, the final minute we have or so left. What are you watching out for here in the next 6 to 12 months?
Gosh, my crystal ball is really not all that good. I agree with you that generative AI, 3 months ago, we might not have been having this conversation about generative AI. So I don't know if it's going to be the next new technology or the next application for technologies, or simply trying to figure out how to navigate as we move on in the latter time of the administration. Who knows? But I'm sure it'll be exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was a great conversation. Again, I'd like to thank today's guest, Ann Dunkin, the Chief Information Officer for the Energy Department. Ann, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
I'm your moderator, Justin Doubleday, and you're watching Federal News Network. Let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cloud Exchange.